So the ANC is going to create 3.5 million job opportunities over the next 5 years. How much of a job is a job opportunity? I mean, the one thing that it definitely isn't is a job.
Yeah.
Because if it was a job, they'd call it a job. Mark, good morning.
Good morning indeed. It's almost March. I mean, it's hard to believe. You know why it seems to go faster and faster, Tim, is because every incremental unit of time is a smaller and smaller fraction of the lives that we've lived.
Right.
And so in our minds, it seems to be less and less, although it's the same. So good morning, everyone. We're almost up to Easter.
I know, it's amazing.
And the elections.
Yeah, and the elections, yeah. Yeah, I read this morning, so really quite a nice quote, sort of quite a sort of middle-aged tech guy.
No.
And he was asked whether he had any regrets in life. And he said, my biggest regret was that for every birthday I had with a 0 in it, I thought, oh my God, I'm old. So when I was 30, 40, 50, 60, but that was so stupid. I wasn't old.
Yeah.
I'm old now.
I get accused of the opposite. People are forever telling me to grow up already. You're nearly 70. Behave yourself. And so I'm in the other box there. I've always felt I should grow up a little bit more, but I've got no plans to. Before we know it, the election will be over, Tim. What are they offering us?
Yeah. Yes. No, this is what I was thinking. We should talk a little bit about the manifestos. I'm always astounded at how little manifestos change.
Yeah.
I mean, the ANC has been peddling the same manifesto for 30 years now. Basically the same one. There's more or less the same stuff. We've got to have this. We've got a job creation, blah, 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 blah. And yet, the country has grown at like an average of less than 1% over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
If that happens, surely you change. Surely there's like a change of course. Surely you look at the situation and say, we need to change up stuff. This is not working.
Let me be borderline devious on that point and say this. What happens if it was actually your intention to perpetuate low growth in the name of creating a dependent population over which you could prevail with ever decreasing small gifts? What happens if that's what you plan to do?
Ooh, wow.
Okay. Because if you sit back, you'd find some foundation for that hypothesis, because we're getting poorer and poorer, and yet much is made of the fact that we've, 10 times as many people are on grants, and we continually talking about, 60% of the budget, okay, went on public sector wages and social grants. 60% of the budget, okay, is on something that provides little or no return. Now, there's a completely opposite approach that one could take to all of this, and you could say, we're going to grow the economy, and that's going to fix everything. Okay, the invisible hand of that economic good fortune is going to raise taxes and so on. But to be unfair for a minute, you hardly have to listen to 2 or 3 manifestos to get the manifestos for everyone. There's a huge intersection in the unfulfilled and broken promises across all parties. Or am I being unkind?
No, I mean, it's like that. Who was it? Somebody a long time ago said, I don't vote in elections because whoever you vote for, you end up getting a politician, and that just encourages them. No. I mean,
so you've depressed me, man. I mean, is that true, man? Yeah, it's true. It's one of those self-fulfilling, self-reflective. No, that's horrible, man. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But it's interesting. We've just had our last effort at registering the population for the election, right?
Yeah.
So now we know how many voters are going to contest this election. The answer is 27.8 million people. So the population is 62 million, okay? So there's 21 million South Africans who are under 18. So in other words, there are 41 million people who could vote if they were registered.
Yeah.
But we only have 27.8 million registered voters. That means there's 13 million people out there who could vote if they had bothered to register.
The biggest party of all.
Yeah. So this is not even the people who are registered and who won't vote.
Yeah.
So now what is that number? Okay. So last election, there were 26.8 million registered voters. 66% of them actually cast a ballot on election day. And that number has been decreasing every election. And, it's absolutely incredible. In 1999, the turnout, the proportion of people who were registered who actually did cast a vote, 89%. I mean, 90%, basically everybody, except people who had some sort of situation in which they couldn't make it. I mean, it's incredible how fast this number has dropped.
Yeah, you've got 2/3 of the population that can vote that have registered to vote, and only 2/3 of those registered are voting. So if you look at the product of those two observations, you get to like 45% or something. You get less than half the eligible population are voting. Okay, and so are the causes for that there's nothing to vote for, or are the causes for that there's nothing differential to vote for, that there's not significant a difference enough to be discerning in where you cast your vote, so you may as well go same old, and accept your lot in life? Or is it a protest? I mean, what do you think?
I think there's two reasons. The first is that there's a kind of sense of gloom about, this has happened all over the world. The Party of Liberation has this extraordinary momentum, which it carries forward. For them, it's great. They can do anything they want. People still vote for them, right? For years and years and years. But what it also does is it bakes in a certain amount of cynicism about the political system. So a lot of people think, there's no point in voting. The ANC is just going to win. So that's the one problem. The second problem is, I think that up till now, South Africa hasn't provided viable alternatives, attractive, viable alternatives.
Yeah, I think that's the root cause.
The reason basically is that the DA is too untransformed and the EFF is too bonkers. So people who are sort of on the outside fringes of the ANC rather just don't vote, rather than having to make the difficult choice. So now the question is, will they do it this time? Will they change? Will they find new parties? And, they've got a full choice because there's 400 registered political parties. So, it's not like they won't have a choice.
Yeah, but realistically, they've only got a choice of about 6 or 10. And that 6 or 10, after the first 3, which is ANC, EFF, and DA, then you splinter down to Action, and then you splinter down to IFP, and then the rest, okay? And so there isn't a sufficiently compelling story that has got momentum, and this election might give it momentum. If there is a sufficiently new and different way of thinking that gets a popular vote, then we would have crossed the point where the electorate are starting to listen. And, I go, since the budget, I just want to raise this because at some point we must talk about all the sources of capital that we need to make this economic dream a reality. Almost every person I've spoken to doesn't really understand the contingency reserve issue and the accounting issue versus the economic reality and the, whether it was good or bad. And so if the people that I happen to be sitting across the table having a cup of coffee with or bump into in the shopping centers are not fully afraid, because a lot of them ask me as if I would be, then how informed are the electorate? And I would argue they're not informed at all about the sophisticated sources of capital that this government is focusing on, which is, I see the prescribed assets debate has come back into focus for pension funds. We're looking at raiding the reserves. We're looking at, sort of regular. We're looking at capital by force, not capital by invitation. Okay, that's where I see it. And that scares away, to me, one of the primary sources of capital, which is international capital that's got discretion. So what I'm really saying is, we're talking about voting. How many people know, read, understand, are capable of differentiating and then making an informed decision on their best estimate of the truth that underlies the vast intersections between promises, most of which look unrealistic to me? Across all parties, by the way.
I mean, it's true of every country in some senses.
Yeah, I know that.
I think it's particularly true here. And you can tell that's true precisely because of your earlier point about, the lack of a growth strategy. If people knew how much better things would be if the country just grew by 3% compared to 1%. You know what I mean? So it sounds like it's just 2%. What's that? It's just 2, it's very small. But I mean, if you magnify that out over the size of the economy, your life dramatically changes if you are even in the, ninth poorest percentile in South Africa, if there's a 3% growth, much more than you would get from the extended public works programs or, in some ways, I think the worst word that was ever invented was this word trickle down, because people think of, economics, they just support a trickle down economy, and we can't live on a trickle. But it isn't a trickle. It's a gusher. If you're growing like India is growing at the moment at 8% a year, then the proportion of people in poverty starts dropping by 10% a year.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to something we mentioned last week, which is the Kotze Dam in Lesotho. I was there before they started building because we raised the capital for that thing. There was just this little tiny river at the bottom of a gorge, that became the huge Kotze Dam. But why did it become? Because it flowed all the time. Just, there was water coming in. There was water coming in. There was water, and eventually it fills up. That's how it works because you've dammed it up. Yeah. Now, it's not only the fact that you're not focusing on growth. The real issue is the application of the capital that we are extracting rather than earning, and what it's being spent on. That's the real issue. It's being spent on a zero return, and yet it's got a huge cost. So we're borrowing money and taking money away from safety nets and long-term necessity and consuming it.
Yes.
Okay, consumption doesn't yield a return.
Yes.
Okay. This to me is all self-evident and completely, diagnosable and analyzable into the truth. It would control alternate belief the entire mindset of the population if they were presented with the truth of their economic outlook. I mean, we're paying R1 billion a day, nearest damn it, in interest. Well, that's not going to feed anybody, okay? We've got to look at the application of capital, and the application of capital in the absence of a growth strategy is support.
Yes.
Okay, and rescue.
Yes.
And that will be our nemesis.
No. And what's a big victim here? One of the biggest victims, and to me, it's just egregious. The big victim here is language.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Because you start having to use words that don't mean what they seem to mean. So one of the things I noticed in the ANC manifesto was this thing about job opportunities. So the ANC is going to create 3.5 million job opportunities over the next 5 years. So now, what is a job opportunity? Is that like not a job, or is it a job? Or how much of a job is a job opportunity? I mean, the one thing that it definitely isn't is a job.
Yeah.
Because if it was a job, they'd call it a job.
Yeah.
This notion of prescribed assets, people keep on talking about it for ages. It's been going on now for years and years and years. But you can't have prescribed assets. Of course, you can have prescribed assets. But once you prescribe the assets, you have to have an ability to invest it in projects that make economic sense.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
If you said to me they were going to appoint an independent council whose mandate it is to invest 5% of all pension fund money, taking a number out of there, that's a huge, huge number. And if that was independent of political intervention and all of the agendas that we've heard in the manifestos, and it was focused entirely on growth strategy, that fund would be able to leverage capital from around the world to join it in these virtuous, economically productive, risk-return adjusted opportunities that would be presented to this astute and informed and experienced group of people, which would be the Council for the Investment of Prescribed Assets, then I'd say yes, because, it would be self-fulfilling, it would create more taxes. And I would also say it should have a limited life, and let's call that life 3 to 5 years. Okay, so that it's just a catalyst for persuasion. What we need to do, Tim, is persuade the population of the virtue of deferred consumption.
Yes, I agree. The part of the problem with prescribed assets is that there's an inbuilt tautology inside the idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you prescribe assets, so now you've got a pot of money, and now you've got to invest that money. So let's say that you invest that money effectively. If you do that, then there's no necessity for prescribed assets.
There you
because
go.
People would invest anyway. What I mean? So why not just have the investment opportunity, the rational investment opportunity in the first place? You don't need to prescribe assets. Money will come galloping through the door at a vast rate, as it does, by the way, for a lot of projects in South Africa.
Yeah, it does. I'll tell you why it might have a temporary place to fill is because of the state we're in. okay, is because of the state of indebtedness. We're below the surface. We're not just running along on a flat surface with opportunities bobbing up and down. We are deeply below the surface of sustainability.
Yes.
Deeply below and going deeper. So we need something to fill up that.
Yeah, but the starting point is not prescribed assets. The starting point is identifying the projects.
Yeah.
If they put out, a call for investment in a project, let's say build a new city, just kind of completely way out there. Let's build a new city where you're going to need, 50 billion rand. We're going to put it here in the Free State. It's going to be magnificent. There's going to be slides for kids and roads that go around in circles. Let's assume that was a good idea. Okay, it's not. But if that was a good idea and you didn't get enough investment for it, then by all means prescribe the damn assets. But let's see the project first.
Well, if the project is a good idea, it will raise capital. Conditional only, uniquely perhaps in our situation, on the absence of government interference, the absence of a rigged tender system, the absence of all of the impediments, including the taxes, which include things like, compulsory shareholdings by various demographic constituents and all of those kinds of things. If you made this an open market debate, then capital would make its own risk-adjusted return decisions, and it would come in abundance. If it was left to preside over the operating assets, and we talked about this last week in the case of Norway and the North Sea oil reserves and so on, that's what we need. We need the government, public servants, to stand aside and let business provide the impetus, and they collect the taxes.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I don't know how complicated this is to anyone, but it's not complicated, and there isn't another solution.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, let's move on. You wanted to talk a little bit about the cows. I do too. I think it's an extraordinary situation.
It's affected me, this thing, actually.
Really? Okay.
19,000 animals. I can only imagine what, people, go on and on about shooting a guinea fowl that you're going to eat. Well, the guinea fowl is kind of flying along peacefully, surveying the world in which it's living, and the next minute it's dead. Okay. Juxtaposition that with a cow that gets onto a boat that makes it seasick and it vomits, and the place is full of shit and it can hardly breathe, and it's kept alive for some purpose, quite beyond its reckoning, for a month. Okay? And then it's taken off, scrubbed clean, and sent to an abattoir. Well, I can't imagine who would have it in them to be the captain of such a ship, knowing what the cargo is inside that ship. I can't imagine who is that inhumane in their minds. And it's affected me. I can't stop thinking of the images and the pain and suffering and the ignoring of it that must take place for the month at sea. When you are on the fucking ship and you've got all of these smells and these funny things, it's too terrible for words for me. I can't abide it, actually. And, without the same emotion, you can go into business where there are people who will make money at the cost of anything. Who have no basic principles of good behavior and good faith and good manners and all of those kind of things. And I can't abide them either, to be honest.
I learned this interesting statistic. Did you know that people who work in debt retrieval services earn less than people who work in fast food restaurants? So I was listening to this interview, and somebody asked a banker, why is it that you pay these people so little? Surely this is the worst job in the world.
Yeah.
And his response was, you just slightly underestimate, there's some people who like it.
No, it's true. It's true.
You just slightly underestimate how horrible people are.
Yeah, there are people who are horrible, and I've seen it. I've seen it in the most. I've seen so many horrible people applauded.
I know
for achievements measured only in money, and I can't abide it.
And yet they ignore us.
Anyway.
Mark. Jesus.
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
Awful.
So the other number, which is also a sad number, is 31,000 people killed in Ukraine. I don't know what all these statistics are, but it also gets personal. When you think about the consequences of war, I saw a picture of some guy who'd been crippled and lost his sight and so on. And you go, when he left home to go and fight this war, what did he believe? What did he want? What was he just a person with a job who became a sacrifice for some ego? I'm a little bit depressed about these things. Anyway,
yeah, it's just
have a nice week.
Yes, apart from that,
apart from that, and the state you're in, and blah blah. It's a complicated world, but it's not all nice. Okay, I'll see you next week. I'll be in a much better mood because someone told me we had a fun show, and obviously this week
we didn't deliver that.
The exception proves the rule.
Cool, man.
Thanks.
Cheers.
This show is part of the Africa Podcast Network, the biggest pod network on the continent. For sales inquiries, please contact us at info@africapodcastnetwork.com.